There comes a moment in life when you realize you're one bad day away from losing everything that matters. For 54-year-old Wes Connors, that moment arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a thrift shop that smelled like mothballs and broken dreams. He's down to his last few dollars, living in a borrowed trailer, and watching his relationship with his daughter slip through his fingers like sand. Then he sees an old yellowed map labeled Just Junk 50C. He buys it. That map leads him to a forgotten Victorian mansion worth over $1 million, hidden in the Pennsylvania hills. But inside that house, he discovers something far more valuable than money, a secret that mirrors his own family's buried pain. What was the previous owner hiding? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Wes Connors had always believed that a man's worth was measured by what he could build with his hands and provide for his family. For 30 years, that belief had sustained him through factory shifts, mortgage payments, and the quiet pride of watching his daughter grow up in a house he'd helped construct with overtime hours and weekend carpentry projects. But beliefs, like buildings, can crumble when the foundation gives way. The trailer where he now lived wasn't his. It belonged to a former co-worker named Gerald Pittman, who'd moved to Florida and left the rusting Airstream behind on a patch of weeds outside Millerton, Pennsylvania. Gerald had said Wes could stay there temporarily. That was 11 months ago. The trailer smelled like diesel fuel and regret, with a persistent leak over the kitchenette that Wes had tried to patch 3 times. Each morning, he woke to the sound of water dripping into a coffee can, a metronome marking time he couldn't get back. He kept a photograph in his wallet, protected by a plastic sleeve that had yellowed at the edges. The picture showed his late wife, Carol, and their daughter, Riley, at age 7, both laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Carol's hand rested on Riley's shoulder, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. Wes had taken that photo at a county fair, the summer before everything started falling apart. He looked at it every morning, a reminder of what he'd once had and what he'd failed to protect. Carol had died 8 years ago. Lung cancer, though she'd never smoked a day in her life. The doctor said it was just bad luck, random cellular betrayal, the kind of explanation that provided no comfort whatsoever. The treatment had been expensive, more expensive than their insurance covered, and Wes had taken out a second mortgage to pay for it. When Carol died anyway, he'd been left with a grief so profound. It felt like drowning, and a debt so large, it felt like an anchor pulling him under. He'd lost his job 6 months after Carol's funeral. The furniture manufacturing plant, where he'd worked for 28 years, had closed, moved production overseas, where labor was cheaper. They'd given him 3 weeks severance and a handshake. He'd found another job within 2 months, maintenance work at a distribution center, but it paid half what he'd made before, and it wasn't enough to keep up with the mortgage payments. The bank had foreclosed 18 months ago. Riley had been 20 when her mother died, away at nursing school on a scholarship that Carol had been so proud of. She'd come home for the funeral, stayed a week, then returned to finish her degree. Wes had told her to go, had insisted she not derail her future for his grief. But something had broken between them in that decision. She'd needed him to ask her to stay, and he'd needed her to know he was strong enough to let her go. They'd both been wrong about what the other needed. Now Riley was 28, working as a nurse at a hospital in Harrisburg, an hour away. She called once a week, visited once a month, and each conversation felt like stepping through a minefield of things they couldn't say. She worried about him in a way that felt more like obligation than affection. He reassured her in a way that felt more like lying than love. They were performing a relationship neither of them knew how to fix. Wes had been looking for work for 7 months. His resume, such as it was, showed a man with skills the modern economy no longer valued. He could restore antique furniture, repair intricate woodwork, read blueprints, and build cabinets that would last 100 years. None of that mattered when employers wanted computer literacy and supply chain management experience. He'd applied to 43 positions and received 43 rejections. most of them automated emails that began with "Thank you for your interest." The thrift shop sat on Millerton's main street, sandwiched between a shuttered hardware store and a dollar store that always seemed empty. Wes had walked past it 100 times, but never gone inside. On that Tuesday afternoon in late September, with $17 in his wallet and nothing but rejection emails in his inbox, he pushed through the door because he couldn't face returning to the trailer just yet. The shop smelled like dust and old fabric, with an undertone of something vaguely floral that might have been potpourri or might have been decay. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Racks of clothing lined one wall, shelves of mismatched dishes and forgotten knickknacks lined another. A handwritten sign near the register read, "Everything must go, new inventory weekly." The proprietor, an older woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, glanced up from her crossword puzzle, nodded once, and returned her attention to the newspaper. Wes wandered the aisles, not looking for anything in particular, just killing time before the loneliness of the trailer claimed another evening. He found the map in a cardboard box labeled Books, $1 or Less, wedged between a water-damaged romance novel and an expired road atlas. It was rolled and tied with a piece of twine that had gone brittle with age. A price tag stuck to the twine read, "Just Junk 50 C's" in faded blue ink. Wes picked it up, felt the paper's texture through the roll, thick stock, quality material despite its age. He untied the twine carefully, unrolled the map on top of the book box. The paper was yellowed but intact, printed or drawn with remarkable detail. It showed what appeared to be a property survey. Boundary lines, acreage markers, topographical features, and in the center, a small illustration of a house with 3 stories and what looked like a widow's walk. Text in the corner, written in careful script, "Whitmore Estate, Greystone Township, 1924. A compass rose indicated north. Property boundaries were marked with measurements. Roads, or what had been roads, were drawn in thin lines extending from the property to larger routes. Wes knew Greystone Township vaguely. It was about 2 hours northeast, up in the hills where old coal country gave way to forest. He'd driven through it once or twice years ago, back when he and Carol used to take Sunday drives exploring back roads. He remembered it as one of those places that time had forgotten, a handful of buildings, a post office that might still be open, and not much else. He rolled the map carefully, retied the twine, and carried it to the register. The woman rang it up without comment, took his 2 quarters, and returned to her crossword. Wes walked out with the map under his arm, feeling foolish for spending money he didn't have on something he didn't need. That night in the trailer with the coffee can catching drips from the leak, Wes unrolled the map again. He studied it under the dim overhead light, tracing the property lines with his finger, trying to make sense of why this piece of paper had caught his attention. Maybe it was the craftsmanship, the careful detail work that reminded him of his own approach to building things. Maybe it was simple curiosity about what had happened to this Whitmore estate, whether it still existed or had been reclaimed by the forest decades ago. He pulled out his phone, searched for Greystone Township. The results were sparse, a Wikipedia entry noting it as an incorporated township with a population of 47, a mention in a historical society database about coal mining in the region, and not much else. He searched for Whitmore Estate Greystone and found nothing. Wes looked at the map again, at the house illustration, at the date. 90-odd years old. The place was probably gone, demolished or collapsed. Nothing left but a foundation and memories. But something about it called to him, maybe the loneliness of an abandoned place, recognizing the loneliness in him. He made a decision, the kind that desperate men make when they have nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, he would drive to Greystone Township and see if the Whitmore estate still existed. It was probably a waste of time and gas money he couldn't afford. But what else did he have to do? Job applications could wait another day. The coffee can would still be there when he got back. For the first time in months, Wes went to sleep with something resembling anticipation, even if that anticipation was almost certainly foolish. The drive to Greystone Township took Wes through country he'd half forgotten existed. He left Millerton at dawn, the old pickup truck rattling over roads that grew progressively narrower and more cracked as he drove northeast into the hills. The map sat on the passenger seat, unrolled and weighted down with his coffee thermos. The landscape changed gradually. Millerton's tired strip malls and ranch houses gave way to farmland, then to forest broken by occasional clearings where houses sat far back from the road. He passed through two small towns that consisted of little more than a gas station and a church, then climbed into genuine hill country where the trees pressed close to the roadside, and autumn was already painting the leaves gold and crimson. Greystone Township announced itself with a faded green sign that someone had riddled with buckshot years ago. The town, if it could be called that, consisted of a post office, a general store that looked closed, and a handful of houses scattered along the main road. Wes slowed the truck, consulting the map. The estate should be northwest of here, maybe 3 miles up into the hills. He found the turnoff, where the map suggested it would be. A dirt road, barely maintained, winding up through dense forest. His truck bounced over ruts and exposed roots. Branches scraped the sides. For a moment, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, if he'd end up stuck out here with no cell signal and no way to call for help. But he kept going, following the road as it climbed higher and curved through the trees. Then the forest opened up, and Wes saw it. The iron gates came first, tall, ornate, wrought with a design of vines and flowers, now rusted to a deep orange-brown. They stood between stone pillars that had moss growing in every crevice. The gates were chained shut, though the chain looked as old as everything else, and a no trespassing sign hung crooked from one bar, its lettering nearly worn away. Beyond the gates, through overgrown grounds where gardens had once been, stood the mansion. Wes stopped the truck, killed the engine, and sat staring. The house was 3 stories of Victorian architecture that shouldn't have survived a century of abandonment, but somehow had. White paint peeled from the wooden siding in long strips, revealing grey wood beneath. The roof showed missing shingles, but no major collapse. Windows, dozens of them, stood intact, though covered in grime. A wraparound porch sagged in places but hadn't fallen. And at the top, just as the map's illustration had shown, a widow's walk crowned the structure like a monument to loneliness. It was beautiful in the way that forgotten things can be beautiful, sad and dignified, and impossibly still there. Wes got out of the truck, approached the gates slowly. The property stretched away on either side, swallowed by decades of unchecked growth. What had been lawns were now waist-high grass and saplings. Flower beds had become tangled masses of wild roses and brambles. A stone path, barely visible, led from the gates to the front steps. He walked the perimeter of the gate, looking for a way in. On the left side, the iron fence continued for 30 yards before giving way to what had probably been a hedge line, now a wall of overgrown bushes. He pushed through, thorns catching his jacket, and emerged on the other side into the estate grounds. The grass crunched under his boots, brittle from the dry September weather. He walked toward the house, taking in details. A carriage house to the left, its doors hanging open on broken hinges. A stone well, its bucket gone, but the housing intact. The remains of what might have been a greenhouse, most of its glass long since shattered. As he approached the front steps, something caught his eye. There, half buried in leaves and dirt at the base of the leftmost pillar, was a key. Not a modern key, but an old iron one. Ornate and heavy, with a decorative head shaped like a rose. Wes picked it up, brushed away decades of accumulated soil. The metal was solid, barely corroded despite its time in the elements. He looked at the front door, heavy wood with an iron lock plate, and something told him this key would fit. He climbed the steps carefully, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. The porch held. The door's lock was substantial, clearly original to the house. Wes inserted the key, felt it slide home with surprising ease, and turned it. Something inside clicked, and the door swung inward on hinges that groaned but still functioned. The smell hit him first, dust, old wood, stale air, but not rot. Not decay, Just time, suspended and waiting. Wes stepped inside. The foyer took his breath away. A grand staircase curved upward to the second floor, its banister carved with intricate detail work. The floor was hardwood, dulled by dust but undamaged. To his right, pocket doors stood half open, revealing a parlor with furniture draped in sheets. To his left, another set of doors showed a dining room with a table set for 8, plates still in place beneath their coating of dust. Everything was frozen, not destroyed, not ransacked, just stopped. He moved through the ground floor in a kind of reverent silence. The parlor held a piano, books on built-in shelves, paintings on the walls, landscapes mostly, competent but not remarkable. The dining room's china cabinet still held crystal glasses and fine porcelain. A library occupied the back corner, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with volumes, and a desk by the window with papers still scattered across its surface. Wes picked up one of the papers carefully. It was a property tax bill, dated 1982, addressed to E. Whitmore Estate. The amount was modest by modern standards. A stamp in red ink read, "Delinquent." He pulled out his phone, surprised to find one bar of signal. He searched E. Whitmore, Greystone, Pennsylvania, and got a single result, a brief mention in a county historical database. Edith Whitmore, 1920–1983, last surviving member of the Whitmore family. No heirs listed. Estate entered probate 1983, never resolved. Wes searched Pennsylvania property law, adverse possession, abandoned estates. The legal language was dense, but the gist was clear. A property abandoned for decades, with no clear heir and delinquent taxes, could potentially be claimed through adverse possession laws. It required filing a claim, public notice, and time, but it was possible. His hands were shaking. This wasn't just an interesting ruin. This was a real house, a valuable property, sitting here unclaimed for 40 years because someone's paperwork had gotten lost in bureaucratic limbo. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, found bedrooms with beds still made, closets with clothes still hanging, bathrooms with towels on the racks. The master bedroom was clearly Edith's, smaller than he'd expected, with a simple bed, a wardrobe, and a vanity covered with personal items. Photographs in silver frames showed a woman aging through the decades, young and hopeful in the 1940s, dignified and reserved in the 1960s. Alone but composed in what must have been her final years. Wes stood in that bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a stranger's life, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. He called Riley. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Dad, everything okay?" "I need you to listen to me," Wes said. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I found something. A house, a mansion, really. It's been abandoned since 1983, and I think there's a legal way to claim it." Silence on the other end. "Then, Dad, please tell me you haven't gotten involved in some kind of scam." "It's not a scam. It's real. I'm standing in it right now." More silence. "Where are you?" "Greystone Township. About 2 hours from you." "Riley, this could change everything. If I can file the claim, if the law works the way I think it does." "Dad." Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice she used with difficult patience. "I need you to be careful. People who are desperate sometimes see opportunities that aren't really there. I know how this sounds, but I'm sending you the address, the owner's name, everything. Research it. I'll wait." He spent the next hour exploring while Riley investigated. The house revealed itself room by room, a place built with care and maintained with devotion until its owner died and left it to silence. He found more papers on Edith's desk, journal entries written in elegant script, mentions of family wealth from coal and timber, her father's death in 1950 leaving her the estate. When Riley called back, her voice was different. "Okay, I checked. The property exists. The owner died intestate, and there was a probate dispute that was never resolved. It's been in legal limbo for decades. A lawyer I know says adverse possession might actually apply here, so it's real. It's real. But, Dad, this is complicated. It could take months, maybe years. And even if you can claim it, the house probably needs massive work. I know. But it's a chance. The first real chance I've had in 8 years." he heard her sigh. "Send me everything. I'll come up this weekend. We'll figure out if this is actually possible or if you're setting yourself up for heartbreak." After they hung up, Wes walked back down to the foyer. He stood at the base of the grand staircase, looking up at the house that might, just might, become his salvation. The afternoon light slanted through grimy windows, turning dust motes into golden constellations. For the first time since Carol died, Wes Connors felt like he had a future. Wes returned to the mansion the next morning with supplies: a heavy-duty flashlight, a notebook, a camera, and a thermos of coffee. He'd spent the previous evening researching adverse possession law until his eyes burned, taking notes on requirements and timelines. Pennsylvania law required open and notorious possession, continuous for 21 years, but there were exceptions for properties in probate limbo, where the clock might start fresh with a formal claim. The iron key worked smoothly in the lock, as if welcoming him back. Inside, the house felt different in morning light, less haunting, more patient. He began a systematic exploration, documenting everything with photographs, taking notes on the house's condition and contents. The library became his base of operations. It was a beautiful room, walnut paneling and built-in shelves reaching 12 feet high. A rolling ladder still hung on its brass rail. The books were an eclectic collection: classic literature, art history, volumes on architecture and gardening, poetry. Many showed signs of frequent reading: broken spines, dog-eared pages, marginalia in careful handwriting. At the desk by the window, Wes found more papers. Tax bills going back decades, all marked delinquent after 1983. Letters from a law firm in Harrisburg, dated 1984 to 1985, discussing probate complications. A distant cousin had contested Edith's will, or lack of will, then apparently died himself before the matter was resolved. After that, the paper trail went cold. In the desk's bottom drawer, beneath a stack of blank stationery, Wes found a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth, the pages yellowed but intact. He opened it carefully. The first entry was dated January 1st, 1945. "Father says the war will be over soon," the elegant script began. "The house feels too large for just the two of us, but he insists we maintain standards. Mother would have wanted it," he says. "I'm not sure Mother would have wanted much of anything except to still be alive." Wes settled into the desk chair, dust rising around him, and began to read. Edith Whitmore emerged through her words. A young woman of 25, educated and cultured, living in a house too grand for the shrinking town around it. Her father, Harrison Whitmore, had made his fortune in the coal and timber industries, building the mansion in 1887 as a statement of success. Edith's mother had died when Edith was 12. By 1945, it was just Edith and her aging father in a house designed for a large family that had never materialized. The early entries were mundane: weather observations, books read, descriptions of managing the household with two servants, who would both leave by 1947, never replaced. But gradually, another theme emerged: Edith's passion for art. "I've been working on a landscape series," she wrote in March 1946. "The hill behind the house at different times of day. Father thinks it's a pleasant hobby. I don't tell him I've been reading about the Impressionists, about how they captured light and moment. He wouldn't understand that I'm trying to do more than just paint pretty pictures." Wes read for 2 hours, following Edith through the post-war years. Her father died in 1950, leaving her the house, the remaining family wealth, and complete independence. A mixed blessing for an unmarried woman in a conservative small town. "The bank manager asked me today if I would be selling the estate," Edith wrote in June 1950. "He seemed surprised when I said no. Where would I go? More to the point, why would I leave? This is my home. I don't need a husband to help me keep it." But between the lines, Wes sensed her isolation. References to the town ladies were tinged with irony. Mentions of church socials she attended out of obligation. A growing distance between herself and the community that had never quite known what to make of a wealthy, educated, unmarried woman living alone in a mansion. The journal ended in 1960. Wes searched the desk drawers for more, but found nothing. Perhaps she'd stopped keeping a diary, or perhaps other volumes were elsewhere in the house. He moved to exploring the second floor more thoroughly. 5 bedrooms, each decorated in a different style, though all showed the same frozen-in-time quality. The master bedroom, Edith's room, was surprisingly modest. A single bed with a simple quilt, a wardrobe with dresses from the 1970s and early 1980s, a vanity with a hairbrush that still held silver strands. On the vanity, Wes found photograph albums. He carried them to the bed and opened them carefully. The photographs documented Edith's life in snapshots. As a child in the 1920s, formal and stiff in fancy dresses. As a teenager in the 1930s, more relaxed, often holding books or standing by easels. As a young woman in the 1940s and 50s, always alone or with her father, never with friends, never with suitors. The later photographs, from the 1960s onward, showed Edith aging with dignity. Her hair went from dark to grey to white. Her face grew lined but remained composed. In every picture, she looked directly at the camera with an expression that seemed to say she had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. But she was always alone. Wes felt an unexpected kinship with this woman he'd never met. He understood loneliness, understood what it meant to live in a space too large for one person, understood the weight of isolation that pressed down when everyone else moved on with their lives and left you behind. His phone rang, Riley calling during her lunch break. "I talked to a real estate lawyer," she said without preamble. "He says you need to file a formal adverse possession claim with the county, publish notice in the local paper for 6 weeks, and establish continuous occupation. If no heirs come forward with a valid claim, and if you can show the property was genuinely abandoned, you might have a case. How much will it cost?" "Filing fees, legal representation, publication costs, probably $3,000 to $5,000. Wes's heart sank. He had maybe $400 to his name. "I don't have that kind of money." "I know." Riley paused. "I've been thinking about it. I could loan you the money." "Not give loan. You'd pay me back once this is sorted out." "Riley, don't argue with me. I know what you're going to say, that you can't take money from me, that you're the parent, that it's your job to help me. But Dad, I'm 28 years old. I have a good job. I have savings. And I can't watch you live in that trailer anymore." Wes felt his throat tighten. "This might not work. I might not be able to claim it. You could lose that money. Maybe, but doing nothing guarantees nothing changes. At least this is a chance." Her voice softened. "Mom would want me to help you. She'd want both of us to try. When can you come up?" "This Saturday. I'm off at 3 on Friday, so I'll drive up Friday evening. We'll spend the weekend going through the house, documenting everything, figuring out what we're dealing with." After they hung up, Wes sat in Edith's bedroom, surrounded by her belongings, holding the journal he'd found. He opened it again, reading a passage from 1948. "I've been thinking about legacy," Edith had written. "What do we leave behind that matters? Father left this house, his fortune, his name on buildings in town. But will anyone remember who he really was? Will anyone remember me? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps all we can do is live as honestly as we can and hope that's enough." Wes touched the words gently, feeling the impression of the pen on the old paper. "I'll remember you," he said quietly to the empty room. "Whatever happens here, I'll make sure someone remembers." He spent the rest of the day exploring the outbuildings. The carriage house held an old car under a tarp, a 1970s sedan, likely Edith's, still intact but certainly not running. Tools hung on the walls, organized and maintained even in abandonment. The greenhouse was a loss too far gone to save. But the stone well was solid, and the property's bones were good. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the overgrown grounds, Wes locked the front door and pocketed the iron key. He'd be back tomorrow and every day after until he understood this place completely. The house had been Edith's sanctuary. Maybe, just maybe, it could become his salvation. He drove back to Millerton as the sun set, the journal on the passenger seat where the map had been. 2 artifacts now, 2 pieces of a puzzle he was determined to solve. For the first time in years, Wes had something worth fighting for. Riley arrived Friday evening, just as darkness settled over Greystone Township. Wes had been waiting at the mansion, using battery-powered lanterns to light the foyer. He heard her car coming up the dirt road, and met her at the gates with the iron key already in hand. She stepped out of her sedan, stretching after the drive, and looked up at the house. Even in darkness, with only the moon and her headlights illuminating it, the mansion was impressive. "Okay," she said slowly. "I'll admit this is not what I expected. Wait until you see inside." He'd spent the day cleaning the foyer and parlor, at least enough to make them habitable. Riley walked through the front door and stopped, her nurse's practical eye taking in the grand staircase, the pocket doors, the frozen-in-time elegance. "Dad, this place is incredible. It needs work." "A lot of work. But the structure is sound." They spent an hour touring by lantern light, Riley asking questions, Wes providing answers. He showed her the library, the journal, the photographs. He explained what he'd learned about Edith Whitmore, the lonely heiress, the artistic ambitions, the isolated life. Riley studied one of Edith's photographs, a portrait from the 1960s. She looked sad. I think she was. Alone in this big house, no family, the town treating her like an oddity. "Sounds familiar," Riley said quietly. Wes looked at his daughter. "What do you mean?" "You. Living in that trailer, isolated, everyone treating you like you're past your usefulness." She set the photograph down carefully. "I see it, you know. How people look at you now versus how they used to. Like you're less than you were." "Riley, let me finish." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I haven't been fair to you. Since Mom died, I've been angry. Not at you exactly, but at everything. At cancer, at bad luck, at the world. And I took some of that out on you because you were there and she wasn't." Wes felt something shift in his chest. "You had every right to be angry." "Maybe, but I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. The medical bills, losing the house, the job, none of that was because you failed. It was just life being cruel." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I wasn't there when she died. I was at school and I got the call, and I've carried that guilt every single day. I should have been there. She didn't want you to drop everything. She was so proud you were finishing your degree. I know what she wanted, but I needed to be there, and I wasn't. So I've been punishing myself, and somehow that turned into punishing you too." Riley wiped her eyes roughly. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I've been so hard on you." Wes crossed the room and pulled her into a hug, something he hadn't done in years. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against him. "I'm sorry too," he said. "Sorry I couldn't save her. Sorry I couldn't keep the house. Sorry I've been such a mess." "You're not a mess. You're grieving." "We both are." She pulled back, managed a small smile. "But maybe we can stop grieving separately and start doing it together." "I'd like that." They set up camp in the library, sleeping bags, battery lanterns, the camping stove Riley had brought for making coffee. As they arranged their gear, Riley pulled something from her bag. "I brought this. Thought you might want to see it." It was a photograph album, one Wes recognized. Carol's album, the one she'd kept of their life together. "I haven't looked at this in 2 years, Wes admitted. "Maybe it's time." They sat on the library floor, backs against the desk, and opened the album together. Their wedding day, young and hopeful. Riley as a baby, as a toddler growing up through the pages. Family vacations, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments made precious by memory. Carol smiling in almost every picture, her joy infectious, even frozen in time. "She loved you so much," Riley said softly. "Both of us. She used to tell me that family was the only thing that really mattered in the end. She was right. Then let's be a family again. Not like before, we can't go back. But something new, something honest." Riley closed the album. "Starting with this place. Tell me everything you've learned." Wes pulled out the journal, the property documents, his notes. They spent 2 hours going over everything. The probate history, the abandonment, the legal possibilities. Riley took notes on her laptop, researching as they talked. "The property's been in limbo since 1984, she summarized. "Edith died intestate, no will. A distant cousin named Bernard Sutcliffe contested the estate, claiming he was the rightful heir. But he died in 1985 before the case was resolved. After that, no one pursued it. The property just sat here with taxes unpaid and no one claiming ownership. So I file an adverse possession claim? In theory, yes. But there's something else. Riley pulled up a document on her laptop. I found a second journal mentioned in the probate records. Personal diary 1960-1975, location unknown. The lawyer who handled the initial probate made note of it but never found it. Maybe it's here somewhere. They searched the library thoroughly, checking every drawer, every shelf, behind every book. Nothing. They moved to Edith's bedroom, going through the wardrobe, the vanity, under the bed. Still nothing. Riley stood in the center of the bedroom thinking, where would you hide something you didn't want found? Depends on what I was hiding. She was hiding something. I can feel it. This house, living alone, never marrying. There's a story here we're not seeing yet. Wes picked up the first journal again, flipping through it. He stopped at an entry from 1955. Listen to this. M came to visit today. We walked the grounds and talked until sunset. She understands me in a way no one else does. When I'm with her, I feel less alone. But she'll leave again, return to her life, and I'll remain here with my secrets. M, Riley repeated. Who's M? They searched through the photographs again, looking for clues. Most showed Edith alone, but in one album, tucked near the back, they found a photograph that stood out. Two women on the mansion's front porch, sitting close together on the swing. One was clearly Edith, younger, maybe in her 30s. The other was dark-haired, attractive, smiling with her head tilted toward Edith. The photo was dated on the back. Summer 1952. That must be M, Riley said. Wes examined the photograph more closely. There was something in the body language, in the way the women sat together, that suggested intimacy beyond friendship. Edith's hand rested near the other woman's, not quite touching, but close. Both women looked genuinely happy, in a way Edith never looked in photographs where she was alone. Dad, Riley said slowly, what if Edith was gay? Wes considered it. In the 1950s, in a small town like this, she would have had to hide it, completely. Riley looked around the bedroom with new understanding. That's why she lived alone, why she never married, why the town thought she was peculiar, and why she might have kept secrets. They sat in silence, the weight of Edith's hidden life settling around them. A woman who loved someone she couldn't acknowledge, living in a mansion that was both shelter and prison, creating a life that was half truth and half performance. We need to find that second journal, Riley said. If I'm right, it might explain everything. Wes pulled something from the first journal, a piece of paper that had been tucked between pages. He'd noticed it earlier, but hadn't examined it closely. It was a hand-drawn map, rough and simple, showing what appeared to be the mansion's floor plan. But there was something odd about it. A room was marked with an X in what should have been the library, but the dimensions didn't match. Look at this, he said, showing Riley. The library is here, right? But according to this map, there should be more space. Like there's a room behind it. Riley pulled up photos she'd taken of the house's exterior. She measured proportions with her fingers, comparing inside to outside. You're right. The library's external wall should extend another 10 or 12 feet based on the windows we saw outside. There's space unaccounted for. They rushed downstairs to the library, measuring the room's dimensions, comparing them to the external structure. Riley was right. There was at least 10 feet of space that didn't exist in the room itself. Hidden room, Wes said, behind one of these bookcases. They examined each wall of built-in shelves, looking for seams, gaps, anything that might indicate a door. On the north wall, behind a section of books on poetry and philosophy, Wes noticed something. The shelving unit was slightly different from the others. The same style, but the wood grain didn't quite match. He pulled books off the shelf, handing them to Riley. When the shelf was empty, he could see hinges, carefully concealed, but definitely there. It's a door, Riley breathed. But how does it open? They tried pushing, pulling, looking for latches or buttons. Nothing worked. Wes stepped back, studying the bookcase. His eye caught on one particular volume, a leather-bound edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, thicker than the others, positioned at eye level. He pulled it. The book resisted slightly, then tilted back on a hidden pivot. Something clicked deep in the wall. The bookcase swung outward slowly, smoothly, revealing a dark opening and a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Riley grabbed a lantern. "Oh my God!" "Edith's sanctuary," Wes said, remembering the word from the map fragment. They stood at the threshold, lantern light pushing back the darkness below, both understanding that whatever they found down those stairs would change everything they thought they knew about Edith Whitmore. The staircase descended 12 feet into what must have been a basement room built into the hillside. Wes went first, testing each step carefully, Riley following with the lantern held high. The air was cool and dry, surprisingly fresh given the sealed nature of the space. At the bottom, Riley raised the lantern, and they both stopped breathing. The room was a studio, a real artist's studio, professional and complete, north-facing windows at ground level. They'd be visible from outside, Wes realized, if you were looking on the hillside behind the house. Natural light during the day, augmented now by their lantern-casting shadows across decades of frozen creation. Easels stood in various positions, some holding canvases still draped with cloth. Work tables lined one wall, covered with tools, pallets, jars of dried brushes. Shelves held supplies, tubes of paint, bottles of medium sketch pads, charcoal. In the corner, a sculptor's stand with clay tools and a small kiln. But it was the walls that truly stunned them. Paintings everywhere hung carefully, creating a gallery that no one but Edith had ever seen. Landscapes, portraits, abstracts, still lifes, easily 40 or 50 pieces of varying sizes. Even in lantern light, Wes could see they were good, very good. Riley moved to the nearest canvas, a landscape of rolling hills painted with bold, confident strokes. She looked at the signature in the corner and went still. "Dad, look at this." The signature read, E.M. Caldwell. Not Edith Whitmore, E.M. Caldwell. They moved through the room, checking signatures. Every piece, every single painting and sculpture was signed E.M. Caldwell. She used a pseudonym, Riley said. A male pseudonym, probably. E.M. could be Edward Eric Ernest. Wes found a filing cabinet against the back wall. Inside were folders meticulously organized, contracts, correspondence, receipts. He pulled one at random, opened it. A letter from a gallery in Philadelphia, dated 1968, discussing an upcoming exhibition of Mr. Caldwell's latest work. Another from a collector in Boston, praising the masterful technique of this reclusive artist. Riley opened another folder, pulled out what looked like exhibition catalogs. E.M. Caldwell, Solo Exhibition 1972. She flipped through it. These are her paintings. She was exhibiting professionally. More folders revealed the scope of Edith's secret life. From the early 1960s through the early 1980s, E.M. Caldwell had been a moderately successful artist, with showings in Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, and even one in New York. The work sold well, not for enormous sums, but steadily. Sales records showed income of $20,000 to $40,000 per year through the 1970s. She was making a living as an artist, Wes said, amazed. While everyone in town thought she was just an eccentric spinster living off inherited wealth. She shipped the work through freight companies, Riley said, reading correspondence. Never appeared at openings, never gave interviews. The galleries thought E.M. Caldwell was a reclusive male artist who preferred anonymity. They found more evidence in a journal, the missing second volume they'd been searching for. Riley opened it carefully, reading aloud from an entry dated 1961. "I've made a decision. If the world won't take me seriously as a woman artist, then I'll become someone they can't ignore. E.M. Caldwell. Ambiguous enough to be male, close enough to my own initials to feel true. Margaret used to call me M, back when she still called me anything. It seems fitting. Margaret, Mem, the woman from the photograph." The journal continued through 1975, documenting Edith's double life. By day, she was the odd, isolated woman in the mansion. By night, she worked in this hidden studio, creating art, shipping pieces to galleries, conducting business through carefully crafted letters that never revealed her gender. Wes read an entry from 1963. The Philadelphia Gallery sold 3 pieces this month. The dealer wrote to say, "Mr. Caldwell is developing quite a following. If he only knew that Mr. Caldwell wears dresses and lives in a drafty mansion in the middle of nowhere. But that's the beauty of it. He'll never know. E.M. Caldwell can be taken seriously in a way Edith Whitmore never could." There was bitterness in the words, but also triumph. Edith had found a way to be herself, even if that self had to hide behind an assumed name and gender. Riley found a box of rejection letters tucked in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Letters from the late 1940s and 1950s, all addressed to Edith Whitmore, all from galleries and exhibitions. The rejections were polite but firm. One from 1955 was particularly cutting. "While your technical skill is evident, Miss Whitmore, we find that lady artists are better suited to watercolors and domestic subjects, rather than the ambitious landscapes you've submitted. Perhaps you might consider joining a local arts and crafts guild, where your talents would be more appropriately displayed." "Bastards," Riley muttered. Another letter from 1948. "We appreciate your interest, but our gallery focuses on serious, contemporary art. We're sure you understand that a woman of your station might find more suitable outlets for artistic hobbies through church groups or social clubs." West counted the rejection letters. 23 of them spanning 14 years. 23 times Edith had tried to be taken seriously as herself, and 23 times she'd been dismissed because of her gender. "So she reinvented herself," Riley said softly, "created a male identity and succeeded. The later journals showed that success, but also the cost. Entries from the 1970s revealed Edith's growing isolation. The town still thought her strange. She had no close friends after Margaret married. Her entire life revolved around this secret studio, this hidden work. "I am two people," she wrote in 1974. "Edith Whitmore, who exists above ground, who buys groceries and pays bills and nods politely at church. And E.M. Caldwell, who exists here in this sanctuary, creating the only things that feel real. Sometimes I forget which one is the lie." Wes set the journal down, looking around the studio with new understanding. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was Edith's true life, the place where she could be authentic when the rest of the world demanded she be someone else. Riley was studying one of the paintings, a self-portrait Wes hadn't noticed before. It showed a woman removing a mask, her face beneath it serene and unafraid. The signature read E.M. Caldwell, but the woman in the painting was unmistakably Edith. She was brave, Riley said, creating this space, living this double life, refusing to let the world silence her. "But she was alone," Wes added. "That's the part that breaks my heart. She achieved success. She created beautiful work. But she had to do it in complete isolation. They spent hours in the studio, cataloging everything, taking photographs, reading through correspondence and journals. The picture that emerged was of a woman who'd been systematically marginalized and had found a way to circumvent that marginalization, but at enormous personal cost. As dawn began to brighten the north-facing windows, Riley made a discovery that changed everything. In the folder marked Legal Important, she found a handwritten will, dated 1982. "Dad, look at this." The will was simple, witnessed by a lawyer and notarized. "Edith left the mansion and all its contents to any person who discovers this studio and commits to preserving the work of E.M. Caldwell and telling the true story of Edith Whitmore." She wanted someone to find this, Wes breathed. She wanted her story told. But the will was never filed. It was down here, hidden, never part of the official probate, which means the property remained unclaimed. Until now. Riley looked at her father, understanding dawning. "This isn't just about you claiming the house. It's about honoring what Edith wanted. Someone to see her, really see her, and tell the truth." Wes looked around the studio, at the paintings that deserved to be seen, at the journals that told a story worth telling, at the life's work of a woman who'd been invisible by necessity but had refused to be silenced. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll tell her story." Over the following weeks, Wes and Riley fell into a routine. Riley would drive up Friday evenings after her shifts, stay through Sunday, then return to Harrisburg for work. Wes remained at the mansion, camping in the library, slowly bringing the house back to life while documenting everything they'd discovered. The studio became their obsession. They catalogued every painting, every sculpture, every sketch. Riley researched E.M. Caldwell's exhibition history, tracking down galleries that had shown the work, collectors who'd purchased pieces. Most of the galleries were long closed, but she found references in archived art journals and regional newspapers. E.M. Caldwell had been more successful than they'd initially realized. Critics in the late 1960s and early 1970s had praised the work's masculine boldness and unflinching perspective. One review from 1971 called Caldwell a voice of raw authenticity in an increasingly commercial art world. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. On a Saturday in October, while Riley was cataloguing paintings, she noticed something that made her stop. A small portrait, tucked behind larger canvases, showed the dark-haired woman from the photograph, Margaret. The painting was intimate, tender, capturing Margaret in a moment of unguarded joy. And unlike the other works, this one wasn't signed E.M. Caldwell. It was signed simply E. "Dad, I found something." Wes came down to the studio, looked at the portrait. The love in every brushstroke was unmistakable. "That's Margaret," Riley said. "The woman from the photo. Look at how Edith painted her." The portrait showed Margaret in her 30s, sitting in what appeared to be this very studio, sunlight streaming through the north windows. She was laughing at something beyond the canvas, her hand raised as if to wave away the painter's attention. The detail was exquisite. The way light caught in her dark hair, the particular warmth of her smile, the intelligence in her eyes. Riley pulled out the journals, searching for references to Margaret. They were scattered through the entries, mostly from the 1950s, but they painted a picture of profound connection. "Margaret came today," Edith wrote in 1952. "She's the only person who sees me as I truly am. We spent the afternoon in the gardens, talking about everything and nothing. She held my hand while we walked. I know this can't last, that she'll marry eventually, that this is borrowed time. But I'm grateful for every moment." Another entry, 1954. "Margaret says she loves me. We were in the studio. I'd just finished a painting and she was studying it with that intense focus she has. Then she turned to me and said it, simply and clearly. 'I love you, Em.' I couldn't speak. I wanted to say it back, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I painted this portrait, trying to capture what I couldn't say aloud." The entries became more anguished through the mid-1950s. Margaret's family was pressing her to marry. She was nearly 30, considered a spinster herself, facing social pressure that even Edith's wealth couldn't shelter her from. The final entry about Margaret, dated June 1958, was devastating. "Margaret married today. Thomas Reeves, a banker from Harrisburg. I attended the ceremony as expected, old family friend, longtime companion to the bride. I sat in the back and watched her say vows to a man she doesn't love. She caught my eye once during the ceremony. I saw the apology there, the grief. But what choice did she have? I have my inheritance, my independence. She has neither. This is what the world does to people like us. Forces us to choose between authenticity and survival. She chose survival. I can't blame her, but God, it hurts." Riley's voice was thick when she finished reading. They loved each other, but they couldn't be together. In 1958? In a town like this? Wes shook his head. They would have been outcasts at best. Worse at worst. They sat in silence, the weight of Edith's loss tangible even across the decades. This explained so much: the isolation, the need for the hidden studio, the creation of E.M. Caldwell as a separate identity. Edith hadn't just been hiding her art from a sexist establishment. She'd been hiding her entire self from a world that couldn't accept who she was. Riley found something else that afternoon, a small brass locket in a drawer of Edith's bedroom vanity. Inside were 2 photographs, both carefully trimmed to fit the tiny frames. One showed Edith in her 30s, smiling more genuinely than in any other photo they'd found. The other showed Margaret, the same intimate informality as the painting. On the back of Margaret's photo, in Edith's handwriting, MC, Summer 1952, the happiest I've ever been. MC, Riley said. Margaret Caldwell. That's where the pseudonym came from. Wes understood immediately. E.M. Caldwell. Edith and Margaret Caldwell. She took both their initials. It wasn't just a random male name. It was them together, in the only way they could be. Riley held the locket carefully. Every painting signed E.M. Caldwell was signed, with both their names. She carried Margaret with her in everything she created. The discovery transformed their understanding of the studio, the work, everything. This wasn't just about a woman circumventing sexist barriers. It was about love that couldn't be acknowledged, identity that had to be hidden, two lives that should have been one, but never could be. They researched Margaret Caldwell Reeves. She'd lived in Harrisburg until her death in 2019, survived by a daughter named Pauline. Her obituary mentioned her marriage of 56 years, her volunteer work, her garden club activities. It didn't mention Edith. It didn't mention that before she was Margaret Reeves, she'd been Margaret Caldwell, and she'd loved a woman in a mansion in the hills. 56 years, Riley said quietly. She stayed married to him for 56 years. Did she ever see Edith again? They searched the later journals, but found no mention of Margaret after the wedding entry. Either Edith couldn't bear to write about her, or they'd lost contact completely. Given the era and the circumstances, the latter seemed more likely. Wes returned to the studio, looking at the portrait of Margaret with new eyes. This wasn't just a painting. It was a memorial to a love that couldn't survive the world's judgment. Preserved in secret, signed with both their names in a code only Edith understood. We have to tell this story, Riley said, joining him. Not just about the art, about who she really was, who she loved, why E.M. Caldwell existed. Some people won't like it. Small town, conservative values, I don't care. Edith lived her whole life hiding who she was because the world wouldn't accept it. She created E.M. Caldwell so her work could be seen, even if she couldn't. But now, Riley gestured to the studio, to the paintings, to the journals. Now we can tell the truth. We should tell the truth. Wes thought about his own life, the years of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The mask he'd worn through Carol's illness and after her death. The way he'd hidden his desperation and despair from everyone, including Riley. He understood something of what Edith had felt. That exhaustion of maintaining a false face for the world. You're right, he said. We tell the truth. All of it. They spent the rest of that weekend planning. Riley contacted an art historian, friend from college who specialized in mid-century American art. The friend was immediately interested, a successful artist hiding in plain sight. Under a male pseudonym was exactly the kind of story that needed telling, especially with the documentation they had. The art historian, Dr. Sarah Chen. Wes amended his thoughts. They'd said no Chen. Dr. Francine Abbott visited the following week. She spent 2 days in the studio, examining paintings, reading journals, verifying authenticity. Her excitement was palpable. This is significant, she said. Not just art historically, but culturally. E.M. Caldwell's work has been studied, collected, exhibited, but no one knew who the artist really was. This changes everything. Can we mount an exhibition? Riley asked. Absolutely. But there's a legal question first. Who owns this work? That was the complicated part. Wes's adverse possession claim was still in process. The hidden will they'd found gave him moral claim, but might not hold legal weight since it had never been filed. And there was always the possibility of distant relatives appearing to contest ownership. We need a lawyer, Wes said. A good one. Riley had already been working on that. She'd found a firm in Harrisburg that specialized in estate law and art provenance. They agreed to take the case, intrigued by its unusual circumstances. The retainer was expensive, but Riley insisted on covering it. Think of it as an investment, she said, in Edith's legacy. And in us. The legal process would take months, possibly years. But they were committed. In the meantime, they would continue documenting, preserving and preparing for the day when Edith's story could be told publicly. As November arrived and the Pennsylvania hills turned gold and red, Wes found himself thinking less about his own losses and more about what he'd gained. Purpose, connection with his daughter, a mission that mattered. He still lived day to day, still had no real income, still faced an uncertain future. But he had hope, and he had work that felt meaningful. An evening alone in the library while Riley was back in Harrisburg, Wes read through Edith's final journal entries from 1983, written shortly before her death. Her handwriting had become shakier, evidence of declining health, but her words remained clear. "I've been thinking about legacy," she wrote. "What we leave behind when we're gone. My father left buildings, wealth, his name on brass plates. What will I leave? A house full of secrets, work that exists under a false name, a life half-lived? No, that's self-pity talking. I leave the work. Real work, honest work, even if I had to hide to create it. I leave this studio, this sanctuary, where I could be fully myself. And I leave the hope that someday someone will find it all and understand. Understand that I did the best I could with what the world allowed me. That I loved deeply, even if I had to love in secret. That I created beauty, even if I had to sign another name to it. If you're reading this, unknown friend, then you found my sanctuary. I hope it brings you peace, as it brought me peace. I hope you tell the story I couldn't tell, and I hope you know the work was real, the love was real. That's enough. That has to be enough." Wes closed the journal carefully, his throat tight. "I'll tell your story, Edith," he said to the quiet room. "I promise." The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in late November. Wes was in the mansion's kitchen, attempting to restore water service to the old pipes, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed the law firm Riley had hired. "Mr. Connors, this is attorney Patricia Holbrook. I have news about the estate claim, and I think you'll want to sit down." Wes wiped his hands on his jeans, his heart suddenly racing. "What kind of news?" "We've located a living relative of Edith Whitmore, a woman named Pauline Reeves, age 62, living in Harrisburg. She's the daughter of Margaret Caldwell Reeves." The name hit Wes like a physical blow. Margaret had a daughter. "She came forward after seeing the public notice for your adverse possession claim," Patricia continued. "Mr. Connors, she has information you need to hear. She'd like to meet with you and your daughter this Saturday. Would that be possible?" Wes called Riley immediately. "Margaret had a daughter, and she wants to meet us." Saturday arrived cold and clear. Pauline Reeves came to the mansion at noon, driving a sensible sedan up the dirt road that was becoming familiar to Wes. She was a handsome woman in her early 60s, with dark hair going silver and her mother's warm eyes, the same eyes Wes had seen in Edith's portrait. Riley had driven up that morning, and they both waited on the front porch as Pauline parked and stepped out. She looked at the mansion for a long moment before approaching. "My mother used to talk about this house," Pauline said by way of greeting. "Never told me she'd been here, but she'd get this look sometimes, distant and sad, and mentioned the Whitmore place in the hills. I never understood what she meant until I saw your legal notice." They invited her inside, led her to the library. Wes had made coffee. The water service was working now, and they sat around Edith's old desk like conspirators sharing secrets. "I need to show you something," Pauline said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "I found this after my mother died 5 years ago. It was in a box of personal papers she'd kept locked in her closet. My father never knew about it. Neither did I until she was gone." She handed the envelope to Wes. It was addressed to Edith Whitmore, with a return address in Harrisburg, but it had never been mailed. The postmark was absent, the envelope sealed but yellowed with age. "Open it," Pauline said quietly. "It's dated 1980. 3 years before Edith died." Wes opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was different from Edith's, more angular, less flowing, but equally careful. "My dearest M," it began. Riley moved closer so she could read along with her father. The letter continued. "I don't know if I'll ever send this. I've written it a dozen times over the years and burned every version. But I'm 62 now, and I've been thinking about time and truth and all the things we leave unsaid. I want you to know that marrying Thomas was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because he's a bad man. He's been kind and steady and everything a husband should be, but because he's not you. Every day of the last 22 years, I've woken up next to him and wished I'd been braver, wished I'd chosen differently, wished the world was different enough that we could have chosen each other. I think about that summer in 1952, the hours in your studio, the walks through your gardens, the way you looked at me like I was the only person who mattered. I was the happiest I've ever been, and I threw it away because I was afraid. Afraid of my family, afraid of the town, afraid of what it would mean to live honestly. You were always braver than me, Em. You stayed in that house, lived on your own terms, even if you had to do it alone. I took the coward's way, married respectably, had a child, played the role everyone expected, and I've been half alive ever since. Pauline is wonderful. She's 19 now, smart and fierce and everything I wish I'd been at her age. She's the one good thing that came from my choice. But sometimes I look at her and wonder what children we might have had if the world had been different, what life we might have built together. I heard through the grapevine that you're still painting, still in that studio, I imagine, creating beautiful things in secret. I'm glad. I hope you found some measure of happiness, even if I couldn't be part of it. I love you, Em. I've never stopped loving you. When Thomas and I are at dinner parties and he's talking about bonds and interest rates, I'm thinking about you. When I'm tending my garden, I'm remembering your gardens, the way sunlight looked through the leaves while we walked together. When I'm alone in the dark before sleep comes, I'm imagining what our life might have been. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. I'm sorry I chose safety over truth. I'm sorry I left you alone in that beautiful, lonely house. If you ever think of me, and I hope you do, know that you were loved. Are loved, will always be loved, even if I never had the courage to show you properly. Yours, always and forever, Margaret. The silence in the library was profound. Riley was crying quietly. Wes's hands shook as he held the letter. Pauline's voice was thick with emotion. She never sent it, never reconnected with Edith. My father died in 2014, and even then, even after 56 years of marriage, my mother never reached out. She died 5 years ago without ever telling me about Edith, about what they'd meant to each other. Did you know, Riley asked, about your mother and Edith? Not until I found that letter and started researching. I found old photographs. My mother kept a few, hidden in the same box. Pictures of her and Edith together, young and clearly in love. I found letters Edith had sent her in the early 1950s, before the marriage. Beautiful letters, full of hope and joy. Pauline wiped her eyes. My mother lived her whole life in regret. She did what she thought she had to do, and it destroyed something precious. Wes told Pauline about the studio, about E.M. Caldwell, about the portrait of Margaret that Edith had painted and kept hidden. "Can I see it?" Pauline asked. They led her down to the studio. Wes had installed proper lighting now, and the space glowed with warm illumination. Pauline stopped at the threshold, taking in the paintings, the evidence of Edith's hidden life. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, she was so talented." Wes showed her the portrait of Margaret. Pauline stood before it, tears streaming down her face. "That's my mother. That's exactly how she looked in photographs from that time. The way she's smiling. I never saw her smile like that, not once in my entire life." "Edith loved her very much," Riley said gently, "and my mother loved her. But they both lost their chance because the world was cruel, and neither of them was quite brave enough to fight it." Pauline turned to face them. "That's why I came today. Not to contest your claim to the property. I have no interest in that. I came to give you this letter to tell you the truth and to ask you to do something." "What?" Wes asked. "Tell their story. Tell it completely, honestly. Show the world what my mother was too afraid to claim. Let people know that Edith Whitmore And Margaret Caldwell loved each other, and that love was real and beautiful, even if they couldn't live it openly. Pauline's voice strengthened. My mother lived in regret. Edith lived in isolation. Don't let that be the end of their story. Give them the ending they deserved. Recognition, acknowledgement, truth. We plan to do exactly that, Riley said. We're organizing an exhibition of Edith's work, telling the story of E.M. Caldwell and who the artist really was. Then include my mother's letter. Include the truth about their relationship. Let people know what it cost them to live in a world that couldn't accept who they were. Pauline looked around the studio. This is beautiful. Edith created all of this alone, signing another name because she had to. But she doesn't have to be invisible anymore. Neither of them do. They spent the afternoon together. Pauline sharing stories about Margaret, Wes and Riley, sharing what they'd learned about Edith. A picture emerged of two women who'd found each other briefly, loved deeply, and lost each other to circumstances beyond their control. Before Pauline left, she hugged both Wes and Riley. Thank you for finding this place. Thank you for caring enough to honor her. My mother would be glad, I think, glad that someone finally told the truth. After Pauline drove away, Wes and Riley stood in the studio, Margaret's letter still in Wes's hand. The twist had recontextualized everything. This wasn't just about a woman hiding her artistic career. It was about love lost and lives half-lived. It was about two people who'd been brave enough to love each other, but not brave enough to claim that love publicly. They both lived with regret, Riley said. Both of them, separate and alone, carrying what might have been. But at least now people will know, Wes replied. The love was real. That has to mean something. He thought about his own regrets, the years he'd wasted after Carol's death, the distance he'd let grow between himself and Riley, the way he'd hidden his pain instead of sharing it. He and Riley had found their way back to each other, but Edith and Margaret never had that chance. We won't waste any more time, he said to Riley. Life's too short. We'll honor them by living honestly, by being brave enough to be ourselves. Riley squeezed his hand. Deal! The weeks after Pauline's visit transformed into months of focused activity. Winter settled over the Pennsylvania hills, and Wes worked through the cold, restoring the mansion room by room. He'd become somewhat of a fixture in Greystone Township, the man bringing the old Whitmore place back to life. The locals were curious, some skeptical, but mostly accepting. Riley's lawyer secured a breakthrough in January. The adverse possession claim was approved, contingent on Wes maintaining continuous occupation for 18 months. But more importantly, they'd authenticated Edith's hidden will. Combined with Pauline's statement renouncing any claim to the estate, the path was clear. The mansion, the studio, and all of Edith's work would belong to Wes, with the explicit understanding that he would honor Edith's wishes. It's really happening, Riley said when she got the news. They were in the library, Wes refinishing the desk where Edith had written her journals. The house is yours. The work is yours, or will be officially by summer. Not mine, Wes corrected. Edith's. I'm just the caretaker. But being caretaker came with responsibilities that were beginning to feel overwhelming. Dr. Francine Abbott, the art historian, had connected them with the Harrisburg Regional Art Museum. The museum's director, interested in the story and the work's historical significance, proposed a major exhibition for the following autumn, E.M. Caldwell, A Life in Two Names. The exhibition would tell Edith's complete story, her life as a marginalized woman artist, her creation of a male pseudonym, her hidden love affair with Margaret, and her decades of secret productivity. It would include paintings from the studio, excerpts from her journals, photographs, and Margaret's letter. It would be a comprehensive revelation of a life lived in shadow. Planning the exhibition meant decisions, compromises, and confronting difficult questions. Riley threw herself into the organizational work, coordinating with the museum, managing authentication processes, and handling media inquiries. Interest was building. A successful mid-century artist whose true identity had been hidden was exactly the kind of story that resonated in contemporary discussions about gender, art, and recognition. But the attention brought complications. A regional newspaper wanted to run a feature story. Art collectors who'd purchased E.M. Caldwell pieces were reaching out, some angry about the deception, others fascinated. And the conservative elements in Greystone Township were beginning to push back against what they saw as an unseemly focus on Edith's personal life. Irving Fletcher, the elderly postmaster who'd known Edith, visited Wes one February afternoon. He found Wes repairing the front porch, replacing rotted boards with new lumber. "Folks in town are talking," Irving said without preamble, "about this exhibition you're planning, about what you're going to say about Miss Whitmore." Wes set down his hammer. "We're telling the truth. About her art, about her life, about her being a lesbian, you mean?" Irving's voice wasn't hostile, just tired. "That's what's getting people riled up. Talking about her and Margaret Caldwell, making it public. Is that what bothers you?" Irving was quiet for a moment, looking at the mansion. "I'm 78 years old. I've lived in this town my whole life. I knew Miss Whitmore not well, but I knew her. She was kind, dignified, kept to herself. After she died, people said she was odd, peculiar, probably crazy, living in this big house alone." He met Wes's eyes. "But now you're saying she was none of those things. She was an accomplished artist who had to hide who she was because we, the town, the world, wouldn't have accepted her." "That's exactly what I'm saying." "Then I reckon it's about time someone said it." Irving smiled slightly. "I'll talk to the complainers. Most of them are my age, old enough to know we didn't always get things right. Some won't listen, but some will. Miss Whitmore deserves better than being remembered as the crazy lady in the mansion." After Irving left, Wes felt a shift. They weren't just fighting for Edith's recognition. They were fighting against decades of misunderstanding, against a town's comfortable narrative about a woman they'd never really known. The emotional weight of the project was taking its toll. Riley called one evening in March, her voice strained. "I'm not sure I can do this, Dad." "Do what?" "All of it. The exhibition, the media, telling Edith's story. It feels too big, too important. What if we get it wrong? What if we expose her life and people mock it, trivialize it, turn it into gossip?" Wes understood. He'd been having similar doubts. "We're not exploiting her. We're honoring her wishes. But we're making decisions about how to present her most intimate feelings. Her love for Margaret, her pain, her secrets. Who are we to decide what gets shared and what stays private? We're the people she trusted with her story, even if she didn't know our names." They talked for over an hour, working through Riley's doubts and his own. They discussed boundaries, what was essential to the story versus what was gratuitous. They agreed to involve Pauline in decisions about Margaret's letter and the more intimate aspects of the relationship. They committed to presenting Edith with dignity, focusing on her courage and creativity rather than sensation. But doubt lingered. Wes found himself rereading Edith's journals, looking for guidance. In an entry from 1972, he found something that helped. "I've been thinking about visibility. E.M. Caldwell is visible in a way Edith Whitmore never could be. My work hangs in galleries, sells to collectors, receives critical attention. But I remain invisible. Sometimes I wonder, if I revealed the truth, would the work be diminished? Would people see it differently knowing a woman created it? Probably. But perhaps that's a revelation worth making. Perhaps someone someday will find this studio and understand. The work came from me, Edith, not from some imaginary man. And maybe that truth will matter to someone fighting their own battle to be seen." "Thank you," Wes whispered to the words on the page. April brought the first genuine warmth after a bitter winter. The mansion's restoration was nearly complete. Water and electricity restored, major structural repairs finished, rooms cleaned and preserved. Wes had hired 2 local workers to help with the heavy labor, paying them with money from Riley's loan, and feeling only slightly guilty about it. He was sanding the library floor when Riley called with news that made his heart race. The museum confirmed the exhibition date, October 15th. "They're dedicating 2 full galleries. Dad, this is real. This is actually happening. The next 6 months would be preparation. Selecting which paintings to exhibit, finalizing the narrative presentation, working with conservators to properly preserve and transport the work. There would be a catalogue, an opening reception, media coverage. Edith's story would finally be told publicly. That evening, Wes stood in the studio looking at the portrait of Margaret. "She's coming back to you," he told the painting. "Not literally, but her truth is. People will know you loved each other. They'll know you were real." Riley arrived that Friday with unexpected news. "I gave notice at the hospital. I'm transferring to Harrisburg Regional, but I'm cutting back to part-time. I want to work on this full-time through the exhibition. And after, I want to help you manage whatever comes next. Riley, your career will be fine. I'm a good nurse. I can find work anywhere. But what we're doing here, this matters more than another year of overtime shifts." She looked around the library that had become their headquarters. "Besides, I like being near you. I like having a father again." Wes pulled her into a hug. "I like having a daughter." They spent that weekend finalizing plans. The exhibition would open in October, but the media attention would start months before. They'd need to be ready for interviews, for questions, for public scrutiny. The mansion itself would become part of the story, the place where Edith lived and worked, now being restored and preserved. Wes made a decision. "After the exhibition, I want to turn this place into an artist residency. A place for artists who need sanctuary, who need space to work without judgment. We'll call it the Whitmore-Caldwell Residency. Both their names together the way they should have been." Riley smiled. "Edith would love that. I hope so." October arrived with crisp air and leaves turning gold across the Pennsylvania hills. The exhibition opening was set for the 15th, a Saturday evening at the Harrisburg Regional Art Museum. Wes had been in the city for 3 days, helping with the final installation, watching as Edith's paintings were hung on pristine white walls, properly lit for the first time in decades. The transformation was breathtaking. Work that had existed in secret for 40 years was now displayed with museum-quality presentation. Landscapes that had hung in a hidden studio now commanded gallery walls. The portrait of Margaret held a place of honor in the center of the main room. The exhibition text panels told Edith's story with the care and dignity they'd promised. Edith Whitmore, 1920-1983, created art under the male pseudonym E.M. Caldwell to circumvent the systematic discrimination faced by women artists in mid-century America. The initials represented both her own name and that of Margaret Caldwell, the woman she loved but could never publicly acknowledge. Riley had worked with the museum's education director to create programming around the exhibition, panels on gender and art history, discussions about LGBTQ+ artists who'd worked in secret, workshops on reclaiming hidden narratives. The response had been overwhelming. The opening reception was sold out, and advance ticket sales for the exhibition's 3-month run were strong. But standing in the gallery the evening before the opening, Wes felt terrified rather than triumphant. What if they'd gotten it wrong? What if exposing Edith's secrets was a betrayal rather than an honoring? "You're spiraling," Riley said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee from the museum cafe. "I keep thinking about her. Whether she'd actually want this. Whether we have the right—" "Dad!" Riley's voice was gentle but firm. "She left a will saying she wanted her story told. She kept everything, the journals, the letters, the work, hoping someone would find it. She wanted to be seen. I know. But seeing her this way, so exposed, not exposed, revealed, there's a difference." Riley gestured to the paintings around them. "This is who she really was. An artist. A woman who loved deeply, someone who refused to be silenced even when she had to work in secret. That's not exploitation. That's truth." The museum director, Constance Whitfield, Wes caught himself. Not Whitfield, Constance Brenner approached them. "Mr. Connors, we need you for photographs with the installation. And there's someone here who wants to meet you." Pauline Reeves stood near the portrait of her mother, tears streaming down her face. When she saw Wes and Riley, she crossed the gallery quickly and embraced them both. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing them, for showing everyone who they really were." The catalogue had arrived that morning, a professionally printed book with essays by art historians, excerpts from Edith's journals, and reproductions of her work. The cover featured the self-portrait of Edith removing her mask. Inside, Margaret's letter was reproduced in full, alongside photographs of both women. Pauline held the catalogue like it was precious. My mother would have been so proud, so moved. She lived her whole life wishing she'd been brave enough to claim this love, and now everyone will know it was real. A photographer took pictures of the three of them standing before Margaret's portrait. Pauline told stories about her mother, the way Margaret would sometimes stare out windows with a distant sadness, the locked box of secrets she'd kept hidden for decades, the regret that had shadowed her entire life. She never stopped loving Edith, Pauline said. Even after 56 years of marriage to my father, even on her deathbed. Her last words were, "Tell him I'm sorry." I didn't understand then, but I do now. The evening before the opening, Wes returned to the mansion. He needed the quiet, needed to be in the space where Edith had lived and worked. He went down to the studio, now empty of most of its contents, but still holding the energy of decades of creative work. He pulled out his phone and called Irving back in Greystone. "Just wanted to let you know, the exhibition opens tomorrow." "I'm planning to come," Irving said. "Got a carload of folks from town who want to see it. People are starting to understand what we missed all those years. What we failed to see in Miss Whitmore. She didn't make it easy. No, but we didn't try very hard either. We were comfortable thinking of her as odd. Easier than considering she might have good reasons for keeping to herself." Irving paused. "You did right by her, son. You and your daughter both." After hanging up, Wes sat in the empty studio, thinking about the journey from that day in the thrift shop to this moment. A 50-cent map had led him here, to purpose, to reconnection with Riley, to a mission that felt larger than his own survival. He thought about Carol, wished he could see what he and Riley had built together. She would have loved this project, would have understood immediately why it mattered. "I think you'd be proud," he said to her memory, "of both of us." The opening reception began at 6. Wes wore a suit Riley had helped him buy, the first new suit he'd owned in a decade. Riley wore a dress, elegant and professional. They arrived early, watching as guests began to fill the galleries. The crowd was diverse. Art collectors and critics, historians and academics, LGBTQ+ community members, curious locals, and members of the press. Someone from a documentary production company approached Wes about filming a longer piece about Edith's story. At 7, the museum director gave opening remarks, thanking donors and acknowledging the significance of the exhibition. Then she introduced Wes. He stood before a room full of strangers and spoke about finding the map, discovering the mansion, uncovering Edith's secret life. He talked about her courage, her creativity, her love for Margaret. His voice shook but held. "Edith Whitmore lived 2 lives, he concluded. One visible but false, one authentic but hidden. She created beautiful work and signed another name to it because the world wouldn't take her seriously as herself. But she left everything behind, hoping someone would tell the truth she couldn't tell in her lifetime. Tonight, we honor that wish. Tonight, Edith Whitmore and Margaret Caldwell are finally visible, finally together, finally recognized for who they truly were." The applause was thunderous. People moved through the galleries, reading text panels, studying paintings, pausing before Margaret's portrait. Wes heard whispered conversations, appreciation for the work, empathy for the story, recognition of the courage it took to create under such constraints. A young woman, maybe 30, approached him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for telling her story. I'm an artist and I'm gay, and seeing this, knowing she found a way to create despite everything, it means more than I can say." Wes nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The reception was in full swing when Pauline found Wes near the back of the second gallery. She was holding something wrapped in tissue paper, her expression both nervous and determined. "There's something I need to give you," she said. "Something I should have brought when we first met, but I wasn't ready. Now seeing all of this, seeing how you've honored them both, I think it's time." She unwrapped the tissue carefully, revealing a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. This was in the same locked chest where I found my mother's letter to Edith. I've been carrying it in my car all evening, trying to decide. Wes opened the box. Inside was a collection of letters, maybe 20 of them tied, with a faded ribbon. The envelopes were addressed to Margaret Caldwell in Edith's elegant handwriting, postmarked from the early 1950s. My mother kept every letter Edith sent her, Pauline said. Even after she married, even after she cut off contact. She kept them hidden for 60 years. Riley joined them, looking over Wes's shoulder as he carefully removed one letter from its envelope. It was dated July 1952, written on Whitmore Estate stationery. My dearest Margaret, it began, the studio feels empty without you. I started 3 paintings today and abandoned them all because nothing captures what I want to say. You asked me yesterday if I was afraid of being alone. The truth is, I was alone before I met you. You taught me the difference between solitude and loneliness. Whatever happens, wherever life takes you, know that you transformed everything for me. Wes looked up at Pauline. These are remarkable. They should be part of the exhibition. I was hoping you'd say that. Pauline smiled through tears. My mother hid them because she thought she had to. But I don't have to hide them anymore. Neither does Edith. The museum director was called over. She read through several letters, her excitement building. These add so much depth to the narrative. The love between them, the intimacy, it's all here, preserved in Edith's own words. May we display them? Perhaps in a case near Margaret's portrait. That's exactly where they should be, Pauline said. Within an hour, museum staff had created a new display. Margaret's portrait now had a companion piece, a glass case containing several of Edith's letters, opened to show the handwriting, the words of love and longing visible to anyone who cared to read them. The addition transformed the exhibition. Suddenly, the relationship wasn't just documented through Pauline's inherited letter and historical evidence. It was proven in real time through Edith's own declarations of love, written in the moment, authentic and undeniable. A local news crew conducting interviews asked Pauline why she decided to share such intimate family history. Her answer was steady and clear, because my mother spent her entire life regretting that she wasn't brave enough to live her truth. She loved Edith Whitmore, but she was too afraid to claim that love publicly. I won't make the same mistake. I won't hide who my mother really was out of fear or shame. The interview would air that night on the local news and be picked up regionally. By morning, the story would reach national outlets. A successful male artist revealed to be a woman, a hidden love affair, decades of secrets finally exposed. But in the gallery that evening, surrounded by Edith's work and the growing crowd of supporters, Wes felt only peace. This was right. This was what Edith had wanted, what she'd hoped for when she preserved everything in that hidden studio. Near closing time, as the crowd began to thin, an elderly woman approached the letters display. She stood there for a long time, reading carefully, tears running down her weathered face. Finally, she turned to Wes, who'd been standing nearby. I'm 83 years old, she said quietly. I had someone once like Edith had Margaret. We loved each other in secret for 10 years. Then she married like she was supposed to, like I should have but never did. She gestured to the letters. I never told anyone, never spoke her name aloud as someone I loved. But seeing this, seeing that their love is being honored and remembered, it makes me feel less alone. Makes me feel like maybe what we had mattered, even though we had to hide it. It mattered, Wes said gently. Love always matters, whether it's visible or not. Thank you. The woman touched the glass case lightly, reverently. Thank you for telling their story. After she left, Riley came to stand beside her father. Do you realize what you've done? What we've done? Told the truth about 2 people who couldn't tell it themselves. More than that. We've given visibility to something that was hidden. We've said that their love was real and valid and worth remembering. And look at the response, people connecting to it, seeing themselves in it, feeling less alone because of it. Wes looked around the gallery, at Edith's paintings illuminated perfectly, at Margaret's portrait surrounded by love letters, at the exhibition text that named them both with dignity and respect. Edith created E.M. Caldwell so her work could be seen even if she couldn't be. But now she can be seen, her work, her life, her love, all of it visible, all of it honored. Mom would be so proud of us, Riley said softly. I think Edith would be too. And Margaret. As the museum closed and they walked out into the October night, Wes felt something settle in his chest. The exhibition was just beginning its 3-month run. There would be more media attention, more visitors, more responses. But the crucial moment had passed. Edith's story was told. The secret life was secret no more. And somewhere, in whatever lay beyond this world, 2 women who'd loved each other but never got to live that love openly were finally, publicly, eternally together. A year later, Wes stood on the front porch of the Whitmore mansion, watching the autumn sun paint the Pennsylvania hills in shades of amber and rust. The house behind him was alive in a way it hadn't been in decades. Lights glowing in windows, music drifting from the studio, the sound of creative work filling spaces that had been silent too long. The first artist in residence had arrived 3 weeks ago. Her name was Tasha Green, a sculptor from Philadelphia in her early 30s. She'd applied for the residency specifically because of Edith's story. A queer artist herself, she'd been moved by the exhibition and wanted to work in the space where Edith had created in secret. It feels sacred, Tasha had said on her first day, standing in the restored studio. Like I'm continuing something she started. The exhibition had exceeded every expectation. Over 12,000 people visited during its 3-month run. Media coverage spread nationally, then internationally. Art collectors who'd owned E.M. Caldwell pieces came forward, some donating works to institutions, others simply wanting to know the truth behind the art they'd purchased. 3 of Edith's paintings had been acquired by major museums. The documentary had aired in the spring, bringing another wave of attention. Pauline had participated, speaking openly about her mother's hidden love and lifelong regret. The film ended with footage of the mansion, of Wes working on restoration, of Riley explaining their plans for the artist residency. Those plans were now reality. The Whitmore Caldwell residency officially opened in September, funded by a combination of proceeds from art sales, grants from LGBTQ+ arts foundations, and donations from people who'd been moved by Edith's story. They could host 2 artists at a time, providing 3-month residencies that included housing, studio space, and a modest stipend. Riley had moved to Greystone permanently, taking a position at a regional medical center 20 minutes away. She'd bought a small house in town, close enough to visit the mansion daily, but far enough to maintain her own space. Their relationship had transformed into something neither could have imagined 2 years ago, genuine friendship built on honesty, shared purpose, and mutual respect. The legal matters had resolved smoothly. Wes owned the property free and clear, with the residency established as a non-profit to ensure it would continue beyond his lifetime. Irving served on the board of directors, along with Pauline, Dr. Abbott, and several local community members. The town of Greystone had embraced the transformation. The mansion brought visitors, attention, and a sense of pride. Local businesses benefited. The post office sold postcards featuring Edith's paintings. A historical marker had been installed at the property entrance, explaining the significance of the Whitmore estate. Wes had even been approached about writing a book, his perspective on discovering Edith's story, restoring the mansion, honoring hidden lives. Riley encouraged him, saying he had a gift for understanding what mattered and expressing it clearly. He was thinking about it, but what mattered most to him in this moment was simpler. He had a home. He had purpose. He had his daughter back. And he'd helped bring 2 hidden lives into the light. Riley's car came up the drive, and she emerged carrying grocery bags for the dinner they'd planned. Friday evening dinners had become tradition, just the 2 of them, cooking in Edith's restored kitchen, talking about the week, making plans for the residency's future. Tasha's work is incredible, Riley said as they unpacked groceries. Have you been down to the studio lately? This morning. She's doing a series about visibility and concealment. very much in conversation with Edith's story. That's what I was hoping would happen, that this place would inspire new work, new artists carrying forward what Edith started. They cooked together, the easy rhythm of family. As they sat down to eat in the dining room, the same room where Edith had taken meals alone for decades, Wes felt Carol's presence like a blessing. She would have loved this. The restoration, the purpose, the healing between father and daughter. "I've been thinking about the second residency slot," Riley said. "The applications are strong, but there's one that stands out. A painter from the Midwest, 60 years old, came out late in life, lost his family because of it. He wants to create work about second chances and living authentically. Sounds perfect for this place." That's what I thought. Edith's story is about more than being a woman artist or being queer. It's about finding ways to be yourself when the world makes that difficult. About creating despite obstacles. That's universal. After dinner, they walked the grounds together as the sun set. The gardens were restored now, not to their original formality, but to something wilder, more natural. Wes had planted flowers that attracted butterflies and bees, creating life where there had been only abandonment. At the iron gates, now permanently open, the chain and no trespassing sign long gone, they'd installed a plaque. It read, "The Whitmore Caldwell Artist Residency, in memory of Edith Whitmore, 1920-1983, and Margaret Caldwell Reeves, 1926-2019. She lived her truth in this room. May all who enter do the same." "Do you ever think about that day?" Riley asked. "Walking into the thrift shop, finding the map. Every day. Best 50 cents I ever spent. It changed everything. It saved my life," Wes said simply. "I was drowning, and that map threw me a rope. But it wasn't just about finding the house. It was about finding purpose. Finding you again. Finding something worth fighting for." Riley leaned her head against his shoulder. "Edith saved us both in a way, by leaving her story for someone to find, by trusting that whoever found it would care enough to honor it. We honored it. We did." The light in the studio glowed warm against the deepening twilight. Inside, Tasha was working, creating something new in the space where Edith had created in secret. The cycle continued, artists finding sanctuary, creating freely, being themselves fully. Wes thought about the journey from that desperate afternoon in the thrift shop to this moment of peace and purpose. He'd lost so much, Carol, his home, years of his life to grief and struggle. But he'd found something too, connection, meaning, a way to transform his own pain into something that honored others' hidden lives. "Thank you, Edith," he said quietly to the evening air. "You gave me back my life by letting me help tell yours." The mansion stood behind them, no longer forgotten, no longer holding secrets. Windows glowed with light and life. The work continued. The story was told. And two women who'd loved each other in secret were finally, eternally, publicly remembered. Wes Connors, who'd been invisible and discarded, had found redemption in honoring another invisible life. That seemed fitting. That seemed right. That seemed like enough.